Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is the year of the dragon. Last week I did it with watercolor marker, and this week I'm doing a dragon with watercolor. If we haven't met, I'm Viv. This is Art with Viv. Welcome, and let's just jump right into it. Now, the first thing I did is I did a light sketch, just sort of blocking out his head and his body of the dragon. I'm not going to make you watch me draw everything in real time. You will get bored with that, but I did the initial block out of body and head, and now I'm just adding in the details, adding in his frills and his fluff, his eyes, his teeth, just things like that. And I'm just using a regular number 2 pencil. I'm not getting fancy with it. And I am trying to darken up some of the body and some of the areas so that you can see it when we paint. But for yours, I would think that you would want to do it just a teeny bit lighter. You don't want your pencil marks showing through too much with your painting. So don't do this as dark as I'm doing it. Do it a little bit lighter. But I just want you to be able to see the process of me just drawing it in. So I'll let you watch for a second and I will pop right back in. Now, once you get him all drawn out, you'll want to apply masking fluid to the areas that I have marked in red. If you are a member of my Patreon, you will get this as one of your bonus pieces of content, some of your freebies. So don't worry if you are a patron. If you're not, you might want to consider joining my Patreon. You get monthly exclusive bonus content related to my YouTube, and it's only $5 a month. So once you get all of that done, you'll put in your masking fluid, and then you'll let that masking fluid dry, and then you will begin to paint. Now I have mixed up a nice deep sort of blue-green. I'm using a little bit of phthalo blue and a little bit of sap green to make this deep blue-green. Use whatever you have on your palette. And then I'm just going straight onto dry paper and doing a thin wash over his back. Now this is for the back part of him. It's not his belly or under his neck. That's going to be a different color. And I'm just getting that wash on there. I'm working pretty fast. I have sped up the video so that we're not here all day. And then I'm going back into that phthalo blue or whatever blue, darker blue that you have that sort of has a green tone to it. And I'm dropping it into the areas where I want shadows to be. Now again, I am just doing a nice medium blue-green wash, and then again I'm going to go right back into that blue, that concentrated blue, and drop it into where I want the shadows, like where the frills, those little frills that are coming off of his back, they're going to be casting shadows. Where his body overlaps itself, it's going to be casting shadows. So I'm dipping straight into that blue, the blue pan, and I'm dropping that in there where I want the shadows. And you can see that clearly there. Then you'll just continue on down his body, dropping in those shadows. Make sure that you're working really fast while it's wet to get those in so that the colors will blend smoothly together and you won't have any hard edges. So you'll do that blue-green color, and then you'll just dip straight into your blue pan, whatever blue you're using to make your blue-green, and drop that where you want the shadows to be while it's still wet to darken up those areas. Now, once you finish the body using that same technique, that blue-green and then dropping in the straight blue, the concentrated blue into the shadow areas. You want to mix up a yellow-green, so I'm using like a lemon yellow, and I am using some sap green because I want his underbelly, his tummy, to be a lot lighter than his back scale. So that's what we're doing here. And I decided I want a little bit darker shadow, so I'm just taking a little bit more of the sap green right into those deeper areas. Now again, if you're a member of my Patreon, I'm saying sap green. I'm not sure if this is exactly sap green, but again, if you're a member of my Patreon, you'll get the exact list of colors and what I mixed and where I put them. So don't worry. But if you're not a member of my Patreon, you can use whatever green that you have on your palette. It's not a big deal. Just sort of mimic what I'm doing. You can change the colors completely. Most Chinese dragons are actually red. I just wanted to make mine blue-green. So I've pulled that bright yellow-green down into his claws as well as his underbelly, because I want his claws to be a different color than his upper body, than the top part of his body scales, those sort of blue-green. And I just keep mixing in a little bit more concentrated green and dropping it in where it's wet for the shadows, just like we did on his body, only we're just using a different color on his underbelly. But it's the same technique. You'll want to go straight onto dry paper, do a thin wash of the yellow-green, and then come back in with a more concentrated green and drop it into the areas where you want shadows to be while it's still wet, so that it'll blend and there'll be no hard edges. And I'm just going to continue on doing this same technique where his underbelly is showing here. And I also brought it onto that other claw. His two claws are up there, are right under his throat, and I want those to be the pale green. Now I'm coming in with a little darker green, and I am just adding lines as segments, to segment each little section. I also picked up a little bit of the color. It was too much. I took a dry, damp brush and just pulled that color up, and you see the highlight. Now I'm coming back in over that with a little bit more of the darker green color. And that where I picked the highlight up, it's not wet, it's damp. So it'll still be soft in there, so you don't have to worry about getting hard edges. Now his bottom claws or his back claws, I'm also painting those this pale yellow green. I really like that color. And so that's what I want to do for there. I don't want everything to be the same color. I want to have a little contrast. So once you get that done, we're going to start working on his eye. I'm just going in with a nice warm yellow and just picking a little bit of that up with my dry brush. It was just a little bit too much color in there, so I just picked a little up and I wiped my brush off onto my paper towel. I'm also going to start going around his mouth, his open mouth, with this same yellow. I'm also using a detail brush, a small detail brush in this section, because of course it's smaller. The larger brush, it would just be too big for the area. As I am putting in my yellow, I'm coming back in with some red or some deeper orange, whichever one you want. You can use red or you can use orange, and I'm just dropping that in where I want some shadows on that yellow. Same exact technique that we did with the body and the feet. This is really a simple dragon. There's not a lot of fancy techniques. We're just painting in the lighter color, and while it's still wet, we're dropping in a deeper tone of that same color family. In this one, I'm doing a little bit of orange, and in the really darker areas, I'm going to go in with a more pale, not pale, but like a bluer red, like alizarin crimson. That's going to be my shadow colors for this yellow, will be alizarin, because it is more on the cool side and shadows are cooler. Again, if you do want to have the exact list of colors and the color mixes, then you might be wanting to join my Patreon at the Dabbler level. It's just $5 a month, and you get all kinds of extra bonus content for my YouTube videos. So that is always an option. I'll link it below, and let me just continue on. So what we're doing here is we are just adding in again, while that pale yellow is still wet, we're adding in some oranges, we're adding in some reds, and for the shadow reds, again, we're going to use alizarin crimson because it is a little bit more toward the cool side and shadows are cooler. So it's not really that hard. You don't have to follow everything. You don't have to join my Patreon. You can use whatever colors you want. That's just an option for you. Plus we have a private community and things like that. It's just a fun place to be. So now I am adding in even more concentrated paint. And when I say concentrated, what I mean by that is it has less water, more pigment, more paint in the mix. And that is all there is to it. And I'm going to continue working on his head, adding these yellows while this yellow is still wet, then coming back and adding in oranges or either some scarlet red, or if I want to take it down and make it a little bit cooler, a little bit of that alizarin crimson. Now I'm going to continue on with this red and yellow mix that goes all the way down. I'm going to call it his mane, all the way down his mane. I'm going to let you watch. It's the same technique that we've been going over, so it's nothing difficult. I'm going to let you enjoy some music, and I will be back shortly. Now I want you to notice that in the areas where his mane, that's what we're going to call those, this part going down his back, where those overlap the blue, I have masking fluid on them. So we're not painting those, they're still covered in masking fluid. So we're just going to go ahead and come down to the tail, which is not covered with masking fluid. Paint that in. Again, same technique as the mane. We're doing that for the tail. We're putting in that nice warm yellow, and then we are adding oranges and reds as the shadows while it's still wet, letting it blend nicely so that there is no hard edges. We don't want no hard edges. So that's all there is to that. Once I get that tail done, I'm coming back up here and just sort of lightening up his claws. So I'm putting in some of that deep yellow right on top of that green because I want a little bit more of a contrast with his feet from his belly. So I'm adding really a lot more of that golden yellow right on top of that pale yellow green that we did, and it brightens it up and it separates it away from that same color that his belly is. Then I'm going to take some red, put in his claws on the ends of his toes, and just the ones that don't have masking fluid. Some have masking fluid on them, so we're going to leave those till last because they are tiny little claws. And then I'm just coming up in some different areas and adding in some detail. I'm going ahead and darkening up his nostrils, and then I'm going to go ahead and darken up the inner part of his mouth and try to paint carefully around those teeth of his sharp fangs. But we want to show the inside of his mouth as well. We might even want to put a shadow over here that's closer to the back of his throat. So we're just putting in a little bit more of that more concentrated red back there, and just add some shadows here and there wherever you see that you need them. Now I'm going to remove the masking fluid, and I just have a rubber cement pick up here, and I'm just removing all that masking fluid of that mane that goes down his back where I had it covered so that I could easily paint blue over it without spoiling it, without turning it blue, because we wanted to preserve that white of the paper so that we could make our mane orange going all the way down his back. And up here, I am starting with his whiskers. I don't know why, but these whiskers that Chinese dragons have remind me of catfish so much. I don't know why, but that's what I think of when I see these whiskers on Chinese dragons, is catfish. Lord knows I love to fish for catfish. I don't know where we're going with this. Let's bring it back to the art, but I am a fisher woman for sure. I love to fish. But that does remind me of some catfish. So we're just going to work on his mane that was covered by that masking fluid going down his back. Same technique, a little bit of the light yellow, coming back in with the oranges and the reds while it's still wet, and just putting it on the edges where you want your shadows. It is easy peasy, lemon squeezy, so easy. I'm just going to let you watch for a second and I will be right back. Now, once you finish your mane and get in all of your little fluffies here, your little yellow fluffies, we're going to work on putting in some texture, some scales. You can see that I have the scales drawn, and you can see that through the translucent watercolor. All I did is I went back to my blue-green, I made it just a tad bit darker, and I'm just painting in tiny little half moon shapes to represent scales. I'm doing them in a way that they look like they are overlapping, but I am also, and this is very important, I'm letting that lighter blue underneath that first layer that we did shine through. I'm not painting completely over it. I'm letting that create the texture and the design by just putting the darker blue in these small little half moon shapes that are overlapping down his back and letting that background pale blue shine through. So you don't want to paint, you don't want your scales to touch each other. You want to have that thin, pale line of blue in between each to give it that texture. Also, as you go into a lighter area, you'll want to lighten up the color that you're painting your scales by either adding a little bit more of the yellow green or a little bit more of the water to your dark blue mixture. And that way you'll keep your shadows and your lighter areas consistent. You'll see where his mane right next to his head is really much darker scales, and as it's coming down into the light, I'm lightening that color mixture up to make that area lighter. And that's all there is to it. You just have to be mindful of where your shadows are. Those areas you want to use the darker blue-green. Where the light is hitting your dragon and he's lighter, you'll either use a little extra water in your blue-green or do like I do and just add a little bit more of the yellow-green and blue-green together. So that's up to you. Just again, be mindful where the shadows are and where you want them. Also, let that first color that you painted, make sure that it is completely dry before you do this. I forgot to mention that. Make sure that your dragon's body is completely dry before you add the second layer of scales. This is just called glazing. You're glazing over another color or the same color and getting a nice, different, textured effect. There we go. Got it all out. Whew, didn't think I was going to. So you'll just continue down his body, on his legs and arms with this, remembering to lighten up the mixture where the light is hitting the dragon, darken up the mixture where the shadows are. And don't let your scales touch each other because you want some of that first color to shine through in between each, giving it sort of a little margin or a little rim. Now I decided that his claws are still a little blending in, so I'm just taking a little scrubber brush that's wet and I'm coming in there and I'm scrubbing just really lightly on his claws, his feet, and then taking a paper towel, dry paper towel, and dabbing up the excess that my brush is scrubbing up. Now this is just a small scrubber brush. It's wet with clean water, just scrubbing over the area and then just picking up that excess paint that I have scrubbed out of the paper with a clean dry paper towel. Now I'm going to come back in, add a few shadows here and there. I'm really just fussing. All this part is pretty optional. I'm just trying to get in a little extra contrast in the colors by adding some deeper, darker reds into the yellows and things like that. That's all I'm doing here, is just adding in some more color, some deeper color into the areas of the shadows of his mane. And then we'll take a look at it and see what else it needs. And I'm getting close to being finished. I'm coming into the green areas, adding just a little bit of shadows. Make sure that they are your layers have completely dried before you add this last shadow on there, because you don't want it to blur and blend too much and it'll ruin all that beautiful texture that you did on the last layer. So I'm just coming in here now with the greens and adding shadows just like I did with the yellows. With the yellows I went back in with some deeper red shadows. Now I'm just going into the body with some deeper blue-green shadows, where I really want those body parts to be separated from each other so that you can tell that this is a leg and this is his body. And I'm just doing that through darkening up the shadows with just a more concentrated, deeper blue-green. That's all. That's it. Same thing I did with his mane and his tail. I just use a more concentrated, deeper red color. And I think he's done. I think he's beautiful, and I appreciate you watching. Please share it with a friend if you think that there is anybody that would get anything out of this. I would appreciate it so much. And y'all have a great day. I hope you give this a try. Thank you for watching one more time, and thank you to all my patrons. Y'all make this possible.